Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, Sikhs around the world are marking today's 40th anniversary of one of the most important events for the Sikh Panth in the 1980s, the Sabat Khalsa, in which the goal of a sovereign Sikh nation, Khalistan, was formalised. We'll have more details of what actually happened and its significance 40 years later. In Canada, a fierce backlash against an RCMP officer who claims the growing crisis of extortion and violence from Indian gangs, particularly against the Sikh community, is not a crisis. An Indian politician guilty of being one of the perpetrators of the 1984 Sikh genocide is about to escape justice. And we have more insight into the recent Azerbaijan Conference, where the case for Khalistan was set out in front of the world's cameras. All that and loads more on today's show, so do stay tuned for everything coming up. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of your great comments, millions of which have been pouring, not literally speaking, but lots of comments have poured in. Thank you so much to all of you who have sent in a comment, and we'll take a look at those at the end of the show. Right, let's get underway. As I say, lots to get through this morning. Now, I talked in this introduction about the Sabat Khalsa. Now, the Sabat Khalsa is actually an extraordinarily important event that happened in the late 20th century for the Sikh Panth. Now, as I say, today, the 26th of January, it marks the 40th anniversary in which there's all sorts of commemorations going on around the world, not least here in the UK, in West London, the Sri Guru Singh Sabha Gurdwara in Southall, for example, has been holding a huge event over the weekend just past. That is one of countless tributes expected to mark those 40 years that have passed since that Sabat Khalsa gathering. Essentially, that gathering itself marked a milestone as primarily a show of resistance against India's Sikh genocide. And of course, that happened. The Sabat Khalsa happened in 1986, and of course, the events only 2 years earlier, less than 2 years earlier, really, in 1984, that really generated this huge grassroots feeling of anger and decision to do something about it. And this is what the Sabat Khalsa was all about. Basically, a Sabat Khalsa, they only happen on very rare occasions in the Sikh community. It's a grassroots decision-making method between disparate various Sikh groups. They all get together. It has only occurred a few times in history, and the 1986 one included, as I said, an agreement to pursue the dream, the goal of a free Sikh homeland of Khalistan. That then, thereafter, after 1986, Sabat Khalsa became the official goal of the Sikh nation. So, I'm just showing up here. This is, as I said, there's all sorts of commemorations going on around the world, and this is a poster that's for the Gurdwara in Southall, just to draw people's attention. As I say, there are all sorts of similar events going around the Sangat all around the world. But the Sabat Khalsa itself, back in 1986, a specific one that it's commemorating, it was originally convened, obviously 26th of January 1986, at the Sri Akal Takht Sahib in Amritsar, in the Golden Temple complex. It was called by the Damdani Taxel, which had emerged as the centre. It became really the hub of the contemporary, the Sikh struggle at the time, following, of course, the martyrdom of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale during Operation Blue Star in that same building. During the June 1984 Galugara, as it's called, the genocide, the attack, that terrible attack, Operation Blue Star on the Golden Temple. Now, at that time, the electoral political Sikh leadership had failed to meet the expectations of the Sangat in accordance with Khalsa traditions. It felt it was not able to adapt to the struggle to the realities that followed those terrible events in 1984, both in June, the Operation Blue Star, and then what followed in October, November, the genocide itself post the assassination, the revenge killing of Indira Gandhi, the person behind Operation Blue Star. Now, let me show you, actually, this is quite a well-known photo. This is, what a magnificent photo. Look at this, that sea of orange dastars in front of the Akal Takht. This was a photograph of that very event, the Sabat Khalsa of 1986. And it was indeed a historic step as the Khalsa gathered in accordance with its long-established traditions. Now, it wasn't perfect. There were things that went wrong. It took a few days to get going, and there's all sorts of arguments backwards and forwards. At the end of the day, this was a huge event that was organised to bring all sorts of, as I say, different groups together. So it's never going to go smoothly. But ultimately, they were united, firstly, obviously united by the faith in Sikh, but secondly, united in generally speaking, a common goal that we need to do something about this. We've got to get together. We've got to fight back against this terrible attack on our community by the Indian state. Because, of course, it does follow a whole sequence of history, including the Anandpur Sahib in the early 1970s, where even many of the very same people presented to the Indian government, here is a list of our demands. They are reasonable demands for simple human rights, simple autonomy. They weren't even actually, at that time, not even arguing for Khalistan. They just wanted some control over, for example, their own water in their own land, for the riparian rights, as it's called, the right of access to their own rivers to irrigate their own crops. Just simple things that even then were being denied by the Indian state. And so ultimately, this is what then drove the events of 1984 and Bhindranwale ji and his followers to end up seeking sanctuary in the Akal Takht, which then led on to these events, which in turn led on to this Sabak Khalsa. So, as I say, it didn't go totally smoothly to start with, but it was nevertheless accepted by all the sections, the disparate sections of the Panth at the time, saying, look, this is right, this is what we need. We need this Sabak Khalsa to pass some historic, what are called Gamata. And these Gamatas were passed at the Assembly. And they reintroduced things like the principles of joint leadership and collective decision-making. So a 5-member Panthic committee was constituted to lead the struggle going forward. It was also decided at the event that a 25-member Jata or committee would be formed to oversee the governance and affairs of the Sri Akal Takht Sahib, again going forward. So on the 16th of January, this Sabak Khalsa was originally declared by the Damdani Taxel and the Karku organisations. The Karku organisations, all these different militia, I think is probably a good word to describe, these groups, again, that were sort of coalescing, that were grouping together to form this resistance to the oppression from the Indian state. But the Sabak Khalsa's official date actually was the 13th of April 1986, just 2.5 months later, on Vaisakhi. So again, the official declarations were launched officially, formally, on Vaisakhi that same year. But it was hosted by the Panj Pyare, and we often refer to this term Panj Pyare. And this is, again, when you go back to the Sikh Empire of the 19th century, the Sikh Empire was governed under this model, this almost unique democratic model that's called the Panj Pyare, which is almost like a rule by committee, but based on Sikh principles. It basically gives everybody, whoever you are, whatever your background, whatever your ethnicity, your religious beliefs, it gives everybody essentially an equal voice, but obviously through a model of governance, it's channeled into this group of 5, Panj meaning 5, Panj Pyare, who then essentially made these diktats, these rules, these policies that would then govern the society. So it was hosted by a Panj Pyare who went as the Panthic committee. They were now here's certainly some names that many of you will recognise. The first one you will recognise, Jatadar Gurdev Singh Kunkar. He was ultimately martyred not long after in the struggle that followed. Now, these battles that followed then through the 1980s and early 1990s, this resistance, this self-defensive resistance against the horrible extrajudicial murders by the Indian state. The Jatadar himself, he was a Jatadar of the Akal Takht, the highest seat, the Gurdev Singh Kunkar. He was martyred in the most heroic fashion. He knew he was going to die. But he continued to resist. He continued to fight for the struggle. He was tortured beyond belief, and I refer back to one of the shows on the anniversary date of his martyrdom. If you want more details of how he gave his life in the most wonderfully dignified manner, heroic manner, following his Sikh beliefs right to the very end. It included other figures like Baba Gurbachan Singh Manochahal, Karnal Dana Singh, Jarnal Aror Singh, and Jarnal Wasan Singh Zafawal, I beg your pardon. Now, during the Sabak Khalsa, an official declaration of Khalistan was made, and this war for Khalistan against the Indian-Pakistani governments was announced to the congregation of 600,000 Sikhs. Now, notice there, it did also declare war effectively upon the Pakistani governments as well at the time. And don't forget, there are many of our critics who say, oh, no, the Khalistan movement is funded by Pakistan, funded by the Pakistan ISI, their intelligence services. Well, actually, I think you'll find that your fundamental assumption there is deeply wrong, because actually this official diktat at the highest seat of Sikh. He said, no, this war isn't just against the Indian government for their terrible oppression and persecution. It's also against the Pakistan government, who, and certainly any members of the Pakistan government who are trying to oppress us, who are trying to resist our call for a sovereign Sikh nation. Now, it also announced an official army to fight for Khalistan. It was the Khalistan Commando Force, the KCF. Also, interestingly, the dissolution of the SGPC. It called for. Now, that obviously didn't happen because the SGPC has prevailed to today. But even back then, you can see in the 1980s, 1986 specifically, they still saw the SGPC as being a body that genuinely didn't represent this movement, didn't represent the Sangha, didn't represent the whole Khalsa Panth, which is interesting. I didn't realise, even myself, that feeling went all the way back even to the 1980s. And don't forget, the SGPC was formed actually by the British in 1925 through an act, a legal act in the 1925 by the British. So interesting also, and I'll talk about the disparate elements that took place here. The Shiromani Akali Dal, that was the political party set up originally by the Sikh community to give it a democratic voice under the system of democracy that the British had imposed. The Sikh community realised, look, we need to play the same game. If we're going to have a representation, if we're going to have anybody who's going to speak on behalf and represent us so we don't lose out, we need to set up a political party. So originally, the Shiromani Akali Dal was set up in the early 20th century to give the Sikh community a voice. But sadly, it also then started to fragment away, to break away and move away from the central core of Sikhi, those who believed in essentially the central beliefs of Sikhi and what was best for the Sikh community, which included a sovereign Sikh nation. So the Shiromani Akali Dal, they held a separate Sarbat Khalsa in Anandpur Sahib in protest at the Sarbat Khalsa in Amritsar, and if I've got that right. And the Mahimanas, apologies for my Punjabi pronunciation, based as a Punjabi word for guess, included Bibi Bimal Kaur Khalsa, Sant Thakur Singh Bhindranwale, and Simranjit Singh Mann. There's a name that we'll recognise. And so that was a separate Sarbat Khalsa that was held in the Anandpur Sahib at the same time, basically as a protest to this massive one at basically obviously a more senior one, because it was the Akal Takht. This is the one that mattered, in other words. So after the Panj Pyare and the Mahimanas met, they devised a plan for the betterment of the Guru Khalsa Panth and the Sikh Kaum, beg your pardon. All their gamatas, this term I referred to earlier, and a gamata, for those who might not understand what it means, it's an order upon a subject that affects the fundamental principles of Sikh religion. It's binding upon everybody. So this is basic. A gamata is an order. It's a policy that's sent out to the whole, to all the Gurdwaras around the world, to the Sangats around the world. This is a new policy that upon which is obligatory, and you must follow hereafter, because it has been sent out by the central core of Sikhi. So various gamatas were announced on the loudspeaker. And this I've got a few sort of quotes and descriptions of what actually happened at the time. So these gamatas were announced on loudspeakers to the entire congregation by Baba Gurbachan Singh Manachahal. You see this huge crowd. So they listened to these after they were decided. After the gamata came the declaration of the Khalistan Liberation War and the Khalistan Confederacy. The entire Gur Sangat was made to oblige to them. They gave jaikaras, their sort of war cries, raised their swords and guns in the air in celebration. Multiple new war cries also came up, such as Bhindranwale Sant Sipahi, Saka Ko Kare Javkai, and Beant Satwan Zindabad. They also declared the Tankaya of Jatadar Santa Singh Nihang. That's interesting. Tankaya, of course, is the rejection, the sort of the throwing out. So Jatadar Santa Singh Nihang was thrown out and replaced by Jatadar Amrik Singh Nihang. He was instead made the new Jatadar of the Buddha Dal. Jatadar Kirpal Singh was also boycotted. Was given Tankaya, declared Tankaya from the Akal Takht. So you can see it was a bit of a purge where they removed those who believed were not actually acting in the best interests of the Sangat, of the Khalsa Panth, and they were replaced by people at the Sarbat Khalsa who they felt would take this movement forward. There was also the formation of 4 Panthic committees. That was the Panthic Committee, Mano Chahal, the Duja Panthic Committee, the Panthic Committee, Zafawal, and the Panthic Committee, headed by Baba. They also declared rebuilding of the Akhil Tak. Don't forget, less than 2 years earlier, the Akhil Tak, this building, was absolutely destroyed by the line of tanks, Indian tanks, that just piled, I think it was 80 shells, at least 80 high explosive shells into that building. It's an unforgivable act. Basically reduced it to almost rubble. And so they declared that the rebuilding of the Akhil Tak that had been overseen by the Indian government and was then known as the Sarkar Tak, that was all pulled down and said, no, we will rebuild it. The Akhil Tak, we will do it, the Sangat will do it. And behind the Akhil Tak, the Sikhs did this is significant, they did a 22-gun salute. And it was significant because that is one more gun than the president's gun salute of India to show their dominance over India. So again, India, the Indian government does a 21-gun salute to pay tribute to their president. Well, the Akhil Tak and the Sangat did a 22-gun salute just to say, well, I wasn't going to say a rude word then, but in other words, I'll say up yours to the Indian government, basically to express their dominance over the Indian government. So that gives you hopefully a background of what happened at the Azerbaijan Khalistan. It was an extraordinarily important event, particularly retrospectively now looking back on what followed. You think of the terrible events of the late 80s, early 90s, where hundreds of thousands of young Sikh men were taken out, they were disappeared into the countryside. They were tortured by the police, by law enforcement. The butcher of Punjab himself presided over a mass murder, basically a genocide of young Sikh men who were murdered and disappeared. And even that resonance of what happened then still hits today. It's still felt today by those still alive who remember these events, very important events. But the Azerbaijan Khalistan itself, it was the launch, basically the fight back. This was the root of that fight back. All these militia, these forces that were formed, saying we need to defend ourselves against what the Indian state is doing. We need to fight. And essentially, this really was the official birth of Khalistan. Although the feeling of Khalistan had been there, well, basically since the Sikh Empire of that ended in 1849. But even through the various even like the Suba movements of the 1960s, where again they wanted autonomous areas based on the language of Punjab. This ultimately all funneled into this one event, 26th of January 1986, where the official declaration, we need Khalistan, the only solution for the Sikh community going forward is a formal state of Khalistan. This is where it happened, and this is why it's so important today, because this is the root of it. This is why it still resonates today. Those men and women who gathered at the Azerbaijan Khalistan in 1986, they had no idea of the horrors that were to follow over the coming years, the mass murders, the years, the decades of oppression that are still going on today, the rise and dominance of the RSS through Indian politics, the denudation, that's the destruction of modern-day Punjab, the deliberate agenda to destroy modern-day Punjab, even, all these years later, 40 years later. The struggle continues. It is no longer a military or a militant struggle. It is no longer a violent struggle in self-defense. It is a struggle that is now democratic and peaceful. And ironically, this is why it's now winning. This is why Khalistan is happening. It is an inevitability. Is because the descendants of these men who are there now, they're all old men, bless them, many who are even still with us. So thank you to these guys. These guys set in motion the events that have led to today's democratic and peaceful movement, when they realised that the physical struggle back, the fight back, the violent fight back that was inevitable, that couldn't win. You cannot beat the might of what is India and its massive, almost unlimited resources. You can't beat that through violent means, physical means. The only way you can beat it is through 21st century democratic, peaceful means. And this is now why it is winning. This is now why the Khalistan movement has gained so much support, so much momentum, and it is beating India. It is now finally beating the massively resourced India. It doesn't matter how much money India have got, you cannot beat the people. The people always win in the end. I'm going to wrap this segment up. I'm going to play you a video. Now, I can't corroborate who is speaking in this video and exactly the date. I believe this video is from the Azerbaijan Council of 1986. If you know who's speaking, I suspect it is one of the Jatadars who's speaking, but it is a wonderful video. This gives you a flavour of the feelings at that time. And have a look at this video.
ਤਾਂ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਪਿੰਜਰੇ 'ਚ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਅੰਦਰ ਪੰਛੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੜਫ ਕੇ ਮਰਨਾ ਹੈ। ਧਰਮ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਇਹ ਦੋਹਰਾ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਫਿਰੀ ਮੁਖਵਾਕ ਭਨਿਓ ਗਰੀਬ ਨਵਾਜ਼ ਸ਼ਸਤਰਨ ਕੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਹੈ ਰਾਜ ਰਾਜ ਬਿਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਧਰਮ ਚਲੇ ਹੈ ਧਰਮ ਬਿਨਾ ਸਭ ਚਲੇ ਮਲੇ ਹੈ। ये 900 साल गुलाम रहने वाली हिंदू कौम सैकड़े सदियां तो बाद राज की गल कर सकती है। 97 वरे सिख हिंदुस्तान च गुलाम रहे, ये आजादी की गल क्यों नहीं कर सकते? किथे बंदिशां सिखां लई राज कौमां दी जिंद जान होया करदा है, बशर्ते कि राज धर्म दा राज होवे। राज की गल क्यों ना करिए? असीं माला फड़ के हिंदुस्तान दे किसे मठ दे पुजारी नहीं बनना चाहते। हिंदुस्तान च हिंदू ने राज करना है, सिख पंजाब विच राज करनगे।
I mean, what you can just sense the feeling, the anger, the built-up anger that's built up over decades. Well, probably more than decades. But what a moving speech. And he gave the speech, and there's so many key elements that came out of that speech. We are like caged birds. What's the point of living as caged birds? He describes the Sikh community as living like caged birds in India, in Punjab. That is essentially what they're doing. There is no freedom. He said, without sovereignty, there can be no justice. And how important is that message from 1986 to today? Without sovereignty, and this will be relevant to one of the stories I'm talking about in a moment, without sovereignty, there will never be justice nor freedom. And then, of course, he says, the Hindus have demanded their Hindu Rashtra. Well, if you can demand a Hindu Rashtra, then we have the right, therefore, to demand our own Sikh nation. These are the roots of the Khalistan movement. This is the formal launch of that fight back that now resonates 40 years later. The fight for Khalistan. And as I said, that fight is now winning. Bless these guys back from 1986, because they set in motion the events of why we're all sitting here today. You guys are watching with the same sorts of feelings that resonate around the world, that we need Khalistan. The only solution, the only way to gain justice and freedom is Khalistan. So there you go. So a fascinating story, and this is why the Azerbaijan Council of 1986 was so significant, and why it is so important that it's remembered today by all these events. So, right, let's move on. And in Canada, a real furore has erupted. This is why choosing your words carefully is so important, because this poor gentleman, John Brewer, the Assistant Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mountain Police in British Columbia, BC, he's upset an awful lot of people. He's a senior police official, and he's under fire after a massive backlash, and he's had to come up with an apology, because he described this whole crisis of violent extortion that's gripping British Columbia as he said it's not a crisis, and unsurprisingly a lot of people got very upset by this. So just a few days ago, on January the 20th specifically, this guy, he is the Assistant Commissioner by the name of John Brewer. He's also the head of the BC Extortion Task Force, so he's got big responsibility in this area, so he should know better. And again, he's a very good policeman, I'm sure, but he's a crap politician. He's not a very good politician because, again, he's chosen totally the wrong words. And he told reporters at a news conference that the wave of violence targeting the South Asian community, and specifically, of course, Sikh business owners, is not a crisis. Now, he compared the situation to the drug overdose epidemic, saying, his words were, what's happening out there with drug overdoses, that's a crisis, people are dying. This is a threat to public safety, absolutely, but not a crisis. Now, the English phrase is, you say tomato, I say tomato. In other words, it's all about what words you choose. But unfortunately, words do carry weight. And his dismissal of what's been happening in Canada, particularly BC, he's saying, yeah, it's a threat to public safety, but it's not actually a crisis. Well, unfortunately, the Sikh community beg to differ. They believe it is a crisis, and many others have said, actually, it is a crisis. There are many who stood up and said, look, this really is a crisis, mate, and you of all people should know that it is a crisis. Now, the reaction, unfortunately, to his words, it was immediate and it was pretty fierce. Even the Premier, David Eby, this character who we've been criticising recently for his recent trade trip to India. So even the Premier, David Eby, waded into this, and he publicly rebuked the officer, saying that if Brewer didn't feel a sense of urgency, he should step aside. So even the Premier of BC saying, look, if you don't think it is a crisis, you should resign. Local leaders and journalists right across Surrey, that's the city most impacted in BC, expressed shock, horror, some questioning if the police response was being downplayed because of the ethnicity of the victim. So they think there is a racial element to this. I don't believe that is the case. It's very easy always to jump to that conclusion. I don't think that is the case. But you can see how angry people are that they're even having to jump to that sort of conclusion. Now, community members have actually pointed to the sheer volume of violence as proof of a crisis going on. For example, they highlighted the fact that there are 132 extortion attempts were reported last year alone. A quick maths, I mean, that's at least 2 a day. 49 of those incidents involved actual shootings. In other words, these weren't small incidents. They involved guns and shootings, gunfire. And in the first 19 days of this year, Surrey has already seen 34 new reports and 7 confirmed shootings. And a lot of this, of course, goes back to the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, who, of course, have been designated a terrorist entity. And so at the heart of this non-crisis is the Bishnoi gang, which is this transnational criminal organisation operating primarily out of India and, of course, organised by Lawrence Bishnoi himself out of that jail cell in Gujarat. In September the 29th last year, the Canadian government officially designated that gang as a terrorist entity under the criminal code. So again, you can see this non-crisis has actually been driven by an entity that has actually been declared not criminal, but terrorist. And again, that's a bit of a clue to say this isn't just a threat to life or anything. This is something a little bit more significant than that. And the group itself is organised of orchestrating this campaign of murder, shootings, arson, exploitation, extortion, etc. to generate terror. Recent evidence suggests the gang has been working at the direction of the Indian government, particularly through its agents, to target Sikh activists, particularly in Canada, particularly Khalistanis. And this includes high-profile incidents, not least the 130-odd incidents, but it includes, of course, the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the May murder last year of a Sikh businessman in Mississauga, and a series of regular drive-by shootings. We've shown videos of these, including the one at Caps Cafe and Ustad G76 in BC. So this guy, John Brewer, he has had to make an apology because there was what's been described as a collapse in public confidence in his job, in his role. So he did issue a formal apology just a couple of days later, and he admitted his comments had impacted public confidence, and he clarified that addressing extortion is a highest priority for the RCMP. So he's had to make a bit of an embarrassing climb down. And I've got a fly flying around. While the task force has made progress, including 7 criminal charges and the deportation of 9 individuals, residents right across Surrey say, look, the fear is still there. You can see some of the sort of the quotes here. And the fear still remains. Even the mayor, Brenda Locke, she spoke even just the day after, saying that there does need to be a national extortion crackdown in response to this sort of saying it's not a crisis. Even she said, look, it is a crisis and you need to address it. And of course, let's put this in context. The RCMP and certainly law enforcement are not the favourites at the moment of the Sikh community in BC, because of course there was a guy just a few days ago, the 18th of January specifically, when he was targeted by one of these drive-by shootings. He tried to defend himself by picking up a gun he had in the house and firing back. He's now facing police charges and being accused of vigilantism by the police force, saying you can't do that and we will investigate and charge you. So he's facing charges. He was at Gurpreet Singh Sahota. This guy, Gurpreet Singh Sahota, he's actually revealed in many of his tweets the impact of the Indian state terrorism on locals in a recent media interview. So all the community leaders and the high-profile characters are out there in front of the camera saying, look, people need to be aware this is a crisis and we are being targeted and people are literally dying as a result of Indian state terrorism. Basically, let's call it what it is. Now, Sikh groups amongst the Sikh community have also addressed this issue. They've all united to do something about it. And the World Sikh Organization of Canada is actually encouraging people to get involved. I always say, look, do get involved in these sorts of things. They're saying they've set up, like other organisations across North America, have set up various things on their websites saying, share your views. And of course, this one is ongoing, and it encouraged you to go to the World Sikh Organisation website, share your views. And this one specifically is saying, it's giving you the opportunity. If you're in Canada, if you're a Canadian citizen, please get involved, go to this website, share your views about this, because, again, it's all data-driven. If they don't think people feel strongly about things, they won't do anything about it. This specifically goes back to Abi's trade mission to India to try and tie up trade deals between Canada and India. They're actually calling for your opinion. How do you feel about this? Of course, the Sikh community, you need to get out there, make your opinion very loudly heard, that it's outrageous that the government, particularly Khan's government, is embarrassingly and shamefully brushing human rights abuses under the carpet in the name of trade. Canadian citizens in the Sikh community are dying and have died, Hardeep Singh Najjar, as a result of direct action and indirect action by the Indian state. That is outrageous. That is an affront to democracy, an affront to the rule of law. You need to make your feelings known to the Canadian government, to Khan's government, and all those underlings who are responsible for this, that you cannot tie trade deals up with countries that are murdering your citizens. It's a simple fact. Let's put some logic on it. So there you go. So do get involved in that. Grassroots power has an impact. Right, I just want to do a quick follow-up to, I talked last week about the conference in Azerbaijan. Again, this is an important conference, and I've talked a lot about how the Sikh community, particularly the Khalistan movement, is doing a lot to generate the legal case to support the case for Khalistan in the global community, particularly with the United Nations, the international courts of law, etc., for the establishment of Khalistan. All these nations are going to need, all these organisations like the UN are going to need evidence to support the belief that Khalistan needs to be established. And of course, one of the important elements of that is, and as I've talked at length in the past, I'll quickly summarise, India's only defence against the Khalistan movement is to say it is a threat to our territorial integrity. In other words, it's saying, look, it threatens our borders. You can't break up India. It goes against international law, essentially. And international law is, yes, secessionist movements, if they are a threat to the integrity of a nation's borders, then we won't support them under international law, except if the people who are arguing for secessionism, for independence, have been abused, their human rights have been abused, they have been treated differently and submissively as compared to the rest of the country. And that is the legal case that the Khalistan movement is making globally, and likewise at this Azerbaijan conference. They are saying that human rights of Punjabis, and particularly the Sikh community, have been abused. Sikhs and Punjabis have been treated differently to the rest of India. The evidence is huge, the evidence is obvious, but it's being collected and it is being presented globally at all sorts of conferences. There is a coalition of people and organisations around the world now that are uniting with a common purpose. Many independence movements are uniting with these same principles, including the Khalistan movement. So the Khalistan movement, at least in this form of the Sikh Federation, went to Azerbaijan to present this very same case, to unite and ally with similar organisations from various parts of the world, but particularly in Azerbaijan, which itself became independent from the Soviet Union, only recently speaking. And so they got together in front of the world's cameras to present their legal case, again, bringing more people, more organisations into this coalition that will then one day stand in front of the United Nations, in front of the international courts, to say, this is the case for Khalistan, this is the legal case. We all support it, all these organisations from all these different areas, and how powerful that is going to be in front of various judges who decide these sorts of things, and arbitrators, etc. There will be somebody from India presenting their case, it's a threat to our territorial integrity. But then on the other table are going to be this huge row of people from all sorts of parts of the world saying, no, we agree with the Khalistan movement. They have a case to answer, and we support it. So again, there's going to be not just people from India, but people from all over the world who say, no, this is justified. It is legally justified. This is why organisations and conferences like this are important, to build up that coalition of supporters who will align with the thing. So I've talked about, I do refer back to the specific segment I did last week about this for more details about what went on. But there's been a press release just gives a little bit of an insight into what was actually said at the conference. And first, before I go into that, let me just play you. This is Maninder Singh. In fact, I think you can see him in the centre of that picture there. That is Maninder from the Sikh Federation. He's Canadian. He spoke very articulately at this conference. So I want to play you what he actually said at the conference, so you can get a feeling of what was said.
But we know that India will be watching. We know that India will also look at this type of conference and feel very sensitive to the idea that the Sikh community, vying for its freedom in the form of Khalistan, is building partnerships around this topic in particular outside of what they would consider as normal means and normal bounds. So these conferences allow us to share information, share our time, meet one another, but at the same time it also pokes our enemies in the eyes that we're not alone in this struggle, that we have the support of the international community in many ways as well.
After 1984, our leader had declared that the day that the Golden Temple or the Darbar Sahib was attacked, that Khalistan's foundation would be laid. For us, that is everything now. The foundation was laid on that day. The declaration for Khalistan was made. So if it's made tomorrow or 10 years from now or 50 years from now, the question is when. It's not a question of if for us.
There you go. So the question is when, not if, for Khalistan. Absolutely. As I keep saying, it is now becoming a firm inevitability. And this press release was issued by the Sikh Federation International. That is the combined group of Sikh Federation, Canada, UK, etc. And it gives it basically a rundown of what was actually agreed, what was said. It said at the conference, it hosted Sikh leadership from around the world. And it included students, academics, legal experts, civil society organisations based in Azerbaijan. Dozens of regional media outlets covered the conference in detail. So again, you can see how important it was to get the message to a wider audience. And participants learned about the history, the ongoing legacy of the Sikh genocide, as well as the Indian repression of Sikh dissidents advocating for Khalistan. It also heard about the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, again, just presenting evidence to the conference, saying, look, Khalistanis have been murdered fighting for this very cause, and others killed by the Indian state. It talks about, it released an informational booklet titled The Khalistan Movement, Past Roots, Global Dimensions and Modern Landscape, whilst numerous media outlets interviewed SFI representatives, that's Sikh Federation International representatives, in order to educate their international viewership about the Sikh cause in their local languages. So again, very important about educating a wider audience. All the cameras from around the world were there. So again, in their local languages, they could hear what it was about, what the struggle was about, and how important it was. So again, it's all about drawing global support in for the whole concept of self-determination for Sikhs. And at the end of the conference, a statement was released on behalf of the organisations which called on the international community to take decisive action on India's violence against the Sikh people. It called on governments, civil society organisations and international institutions to demonstrate their solidarity by standing with the Sikh people in their pursuit for freedom and justice. And the press release goes on that there was an acknowledgement about the historic ties between Sikh people and those of Azerbaijan. Interestingly, this is where it gets really important going forward. We talk often about when Khalistan is established, we talk about the trade routes and how it will become economically a really significant economic commercial hub in that South Asian region. It wants to increase its commercial and trade ties with Asia. At the moment, Punjab is living in a straitjacket, in a prison, effectively, guarded by India, guarded by Delhi. The rules are set by Delhi. Punjab has no autonomy. It has no control really over its own commerce, its own trade deals. If it wants to trade outside of India, it's tied by Delhi control. It's tied by the rules generated by Delhi. And of course, those rules don't benefit Punjab. Those rules benefit the Brahmanical elite. It benefits Delhi, essentially. So ultimately, Khalistan wants the ability to trade with the enormous markets of Asia, this huge region, this huge continent of Asia. And once it's established, it will open up these trade routes. So this is again why this conference in Azerbaijan, in the heart of Asia, in the heart of the Asian continent, it's saying that we have these deep, old, historic cultural ties between Central Asia and Punjab. And just look at the history of how the Sikh people, the missiles at the time, going back even pre-empire, back to the 18th century, how the Sikh community, the Sikh people at that time, they fought all over Asia. They were welcomed all over Asia, primarily for their military capabilities. So they built these huge alliances, these really powerful and deep historic alliances with people all over Asia that was then brought back into the Sikh Empire. The Sikh Empire traded with all sorts of parts of Asia. And that's been lost, of course, when the British came in, destroyed the Sikh Empire, annexed the Sikh Empire. That's all been lost. It was then handed on a plate to the Brahmins, who said, "Thank you very much, I'll take that, and we'll make sure that the Sikh community can no longer trade with the rest of the world, but we'll take those old historic ties." And frankly, they made a bit of a mess of them in their own insular means under the BJP. They've actually severed a lot of those ties with Central Asia that Khalistan wants back. Khalistan says, no, we want to re-establish these old trade routes with Central Asia. So again, as part of this press release, it said we want to bring back these cultural ties, bring back these old trade routes, because when Khalistan is established, we will trade once again. We will renew these old trade ties with Central Asia. So you can again see how important building allies, but also building future trade partners as part of this. So again, this is looking several steps forward. So it says in conclusion, in a wider context, India's violence against Sikhs and the Sikh struggle for an independent Khalistan isn't simply a domestic matter concerning India alone, but a pivotal issue that will help shape the future of the whole region and broader world order based on the Sikh values of dignity, justice and liberation for all. And I refer back to that video I just showed a little bit earlier, where without sovereignty, there can be no justice and liberation for all. So that is why Khalistan is so vital a concept. So there you go. Hopefully a very successful conference in Azerbaijan. Well done to the Sikh Federation International for pushing the Khalistan movement forward. Now, and again, another reason for Khalistan, as if we need another one, justice delayed is justice denied. Without Khalistan, there never will be justice. Sajjan Kumar has just been, he's a notorious perpetrator of the Sikh genocide back in 1984. He's a notorious Indian politician. He's known to have led many of these mobs who massacred tens of thousands of innocent men, women and even children during those terrible riots, that genocide of November 1984. He's been acquitted in his latest case. Now, he's already previously been convicted during some of those atrocities of 1984. He's still on trial for several of those accusations, but another one has just been dismissed a few days ago. The presiding judge dismissed witness statements as hearsay, even though it was noted that Kumar has already been found guilty of similar offences. So his latest accusation that he's been charged for is being thrown out because the judge said, oh, it's just hearsay. Where's the evidence? It's just people saying, making accusations. despite the fact he's already been found guilty of similar offences. It's an absolute outrage. It's a mockery of justice. Now, he does, at the moment, remain imprisoned because of the charges that he was found guilty for. But, unfortunately, it does now seem that an early release is a growing possibility. Now, of course, his incarceration and the stringency, in other words, how tightly he's been held in prison, is also remaining questionable, based on, of course, the understanding that India's legal system is deeply corrupt. It is so politicised now that we know that people like Sajjan Kumar are evading justice. Yeah, he's in prison, but for how long? He's going to serve a tiny sentence, a sentence that actually should actually have seen him in prison 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and still in prison today for the horrible acts that he was responsible for. But he was only imprisoned relatively recently, and it is likely that he will be freed soon for acts that should have seen him spend the rest of his living days in prison. He should die in prison, as should many other like him. Many other Sikh genocide perpetrators. He didn't face trial until over 30 years after the event. Justice delayed is justice denied. This is the outrage of the Indian system. This is the outrage of what is going on. Sadly, that the legal system hasn't just been politicised. People like Sajjan Kumar, who were finally dragged to justice through the efforts of the Sikh community, not through the Indian law enforcement, who didn't do their job deliberately. It was the Sikh community who dragged this guy to justice. It was those brilliant individuals in the Sikh community. But ironically, people like Jagtar Singh Johal, people like him who collected the evidence, who presented an undeniable, undisputable case to the Indian authorities, said, you've got to do something about this because here's all the evidence. You cannot now deny justice. So the Indian legal system had no choice but to prosecute people like this, but then they still managed to evade justice by giving him small sentences decades later and probably going to release him early. It's an outrage. It's a moral outrage. It's an outrage against the rule of law. It's an outrage against so-called democracy. Mankamal Singh on Twitter, a guy who I follow, he's also he disseminates lots and lots of useful information. He waded into this one, and he actually highlighted the fact that India signed the United Nations Genocide Convention in 1948. This is a convention that helps identify genocides and brings in a legal framework to deal with genocide. India signed up to this the year after independence in 1948, but never enacted a domestic law criminalising genocide. In other words, it never ratified it. It's like the torture convention, the United Nations Convention over torture. India signed, but then didn't ratify it. In other words, they didn't bring it into their own domestic law to make it an offence. Torture is not an offence in India because they didn't ratify the United Nations Convention on Torture. They did the same on genocide. Yeah, we'll sign that because it looks great on the public stage, on the global stage, that we support this act against genocide. But then they go back home to India and they don't put it into law. In other words, they may as well not have signed it. They've only signed it just so that they look good on the international stage. But in reality, they therefore are saying we don't support it. So Indian courts will therefore always be legally incapable of prosecuting genocide. So they've done this deliberately. So they then are not able to prosecute people like that politician under the term genocide. Doesn't matter how targeted, systematic or one-sided the violence may be. Legally, in Indian law, there is no such thing as genocide. And of course, when you look right across the Godi media, and every time that the 1984 genocide is mentioned, they don't refer to genocide, they refer to this word riot. They were riots. As Mankamal says, the continued use of the word riots is used deliberately because the definition of riots, it implies spontaneity, chaos, mutual aggression. In other words, it wasn't organised by people like that politician and many Congress politicians at the time who were known to have been driving around organising mobs, giving them the addresses of Sikhs around the Punjab and other cities. They handed them weapons, iron bars, Molotov cocktails. They gave the rioters, the mobsters, They gave them the information they needed, who to target. They gave them the means how to target them. Basically, they whipped up these mobs. They orchestrated this genocide. And yet it's described by the Indian Godi media as a riot, because that says, oh, it was unorganized, it was chaos, it was anarchy, it wasn't organized. There was no direction from Congress politicians behind it. There was no direction from the Brahmanical upper caste elite behind it, etc. Genocide implies planning, power, and often state complicity. Retaining the language of riots always allows the state to deny that violence was organized, targeted, and enabled by authority. So again, you can see how India has weaponized the law, politicized the law. Those are the signs of a failed democracy. Those are the signs of an authoritarian regime. When you weaponize the law and you use the law against your political enemies. And that is essentially what the Indian government have done. Outrageous. It is not a democracy in any way, shape or form. It is a democracy on visibly only, but not in reality. Let's wrap up our news items with a quick one. I always like to highlight these things. Sikh achievements. California has just appointed its first ever pro-tem judge in the, which is Judge Navraj Singh Rai. He's just been appointed. It's a historic milestone. He's the first Sikh judge to the Superior Court of California in the county of Kern. You can see lots of photos of him and his family and him receiving his robe, whatever the legal term is. I'm sure there's a proper term for that. Basically, his appointment. But you can see how important this is. I mean, what an achievement for this guy. And I have to say, if God forbid I ever end up in a court of law, I would much rather be presided over by a Sikh judge, because I know that he will judge me based on his own Sikh principles and background, which of course align with everything that is good about humanity and justice and law and order, etc. And it's a massive achievement. Again, there's so many barriers to all ethnic minorities, and of course to the Sikh minority as much as any other minority. Huge barriers to entry, huge barriers to achieve such high positions. But this guy's done it. He's broken through those barriers, and it sets. And I often talk about examples to the young. What an example this is to the youth of California, but of course to the whole United States, is that you as a young Sikh, if you want to enter the law profession, you too can be a judge, because this guy's done it. You too can rise to the cream, to the top of the profession. In other words, those barriers are dissolving. You have the ability to achieve what this guy's done. So well done to Navraj Singh Rai, appointed to that position of judge. There you go. Always like to finish on a happy note where possible. Right. Oh, gosh, the clock's counting down. Lots of comments to get through, so better move on to our comments section. Thank you. I have to say, the last few days, we've been inundated with lovely comments. And interestingly, loads and loads of comments from people who are new to the channel. Loads of comments from people who've obviously just joined us on the channel. Thank you. Welcome to our little family, and hopefully our growing family on the channel. And thank you for your comment. And I have to say, a lot of love from these comments. I've been really overwhelmed over the last few days about how many really lovely, genuine comments have been put beneath the videos. Thank you so much. I haven't replied to, really to any of them. I don't tend not to reply. I try not to get too involved, and I'll do it through the show. But I have read every single one of you, and so many of you who are new to the show or never commented before. Maybe you're not new to the show, but you never commented before. But many names I've not recognised. Of course, we have our regulars, and thank you to our regulars as always. But many of you who've not commented before, or have not seen comments, you have written some lovely comments. Thank you so much for your lovely comments. They have been really appreciated. The love I've felt over the last few days has actually been bringing tears to my eyes. How emotional I felt. That's that feedback means so much to me personally, for the efforts that I take in this channel. So thank you so much to each and every one of you who have done that. Thank you for your love. It has really been well received and really well felt by myself. So thank you for that. But in contrast to that, let me start with a comment it's quite opposite to this. Mitra Mukhopadhyay, I think there's a clue in the name there really about what's to come. Why are Khalistanis silent on this Khor Takhan project if they really care about what's been going on? Could it be that they receive all their funding from the same group of Islamist jihadists? Oh, here we go again. And the reason they don't want to claim Pakistan-occupied Punjab, where all their religious history lies? Sikhs need to wake up, connect the dots, teach these Khalistani terrorists a lesson, and ask them simple questions to which they deserve to receive a straight answer. Well, where to begin on this one? I mean, the first immediate rejection. There's so much ignorance in this comment that I can only assume this guy is obviously not a Sikh, and I assume he's Hindutva. He might not even be a Hindutva supporter. He might be just an ignorant Indian. With all due respect to you, Mitra. But ultimately, there is so much wrong in your comment. Why are Khalistanis silent on this core to Khan project? I nearly did actually reply to you on the channel, but I'm going to refer you to this reply. I'll probably send a link in response to your actual comment. I did watch my show, my editorial last Friday. I had a whole section dedicated to the core to Khan project. The Sikh community, the Khalistan community, have been fighting on the ground against the core to Khan project. They were the ones who even highlighted to me in person. They spoke to me in person. A member, I won't say who, I'll keep him anonymous, but a member of one of these organisations spoke to me personally about the core to Khan project to make me aware of it. They are not just aware of it, they've been aware of it for decades. They have been fighting it. They have been fighting to get it heard in the mainstream press for decades, this core to Khan project. They are Khalistanis. So, unfortunately, your comment is absolutely, utterly wrong. You have no idea, clearly, about what the Khalistan movement have been doing about this core to Khan thing. Also, another comment. Another of these guys actually said, do you think, for example, at the Hounslow rescue a couple of weeks ago, do you think these Khalistanis who are behind these rescues, this vigilante action, they are Khalistanis? You don't know the Khalistanis because they don't carry a Khalistan flag to a rescue. Why would you go rescue one of your own girls from these paedophiles carrying a Khalistan flag? It is not appropriate. Why would you take a Khalistan flag? Duh, with all due respect, etc., etc. In other words, everything that you said is absolute nonsense. And the fact that you refer to these Khalistanis as terrorists says everything we all need to know about who you are and what you represent. So I'm sorry, Mitra, thank you for your comment, but your comment is utterly, utterly wrong, utterly ignorant, completely misinformed. Please refer back to my show last Friday, my editorial, where I talked about the events in Hounslow, and everything I say actually contradicts everything that you've put in there. So, but thank you nonetheless. I do appreciate you taking the time to make a comment. I'm sure our audience have got some thoughts and backlash against that one. Samsung. This actually follows a similar theme, a lot of comments along these same lines. You can't depend on the British police. Unfortunately, they followed this for decades, and they may actually even be complicit in some of the crimes against young children. That's an accusation I can't support. I don't know if that is true. I have no evidence of that, but certainly the complicity would come not in the fact that they're involved in it directly, but the fact that they are trying to hide it and bury it. That is the complicity that they are definitely guilty of. They are afraid of being accused of racism, as was brought out in Baroness Casey's investigation, to say that the police didn't investigate deliberately because they were afraid of being accused of racism. And ASAP Towing Inc. ASAP Towing Inc. I wonder if that's the name of your business. Says only 6 can put a stop to this because the police are involved. But more importantly, we will fight. We are born to fight for our civil rights. I can't put it any better. Absolutely right. Is that Sikhs have always fought for their rights, and particularly fought against injustice, and fought for those vulnerable, whether you are a young Sikh girl groomed by these awful people or whatever, you're a persecuted people anywhere in the world. Sikhs will always stand up and fight for those who are vulnerable, for those who are oppressed or persecuted. They must defend themselves, is the message that has come out, sadly, out of a lot of these stories. UR Master says, it's not just a Pakistani problem, it's a Muslim problem too. There's loads of these cases in Brampton, even in Surrey in Canada. I wasn't aware of this. Thank you for letting me know. Shame on people who call yourselves Sikhs, especially if there's a huge number of you who still can't deal with these. Basically, so this is a call from UR Master saying, look, this is happening even in Brampton, in British Columbia. What are you guys doing about it? Well, that's not come from me. That's come from you, our master. I don't know. Is it a problem in Surrey? Sadly, if it is, then I have no doubt the Sikh community locally will be doing something about it, because my own experience is where there's a problem, Sikhs will always rise to face that challenge. And then you go on to how to fight it quite directly. I certainly wouldn't advocate finding the guy's sister and making a girlfriend, etc., etc. But certainly, ultimately, it does require some level of, and I've got to hesitate to use the word vigilantism, because that is actually technically breaking the law. I cannot incite anybody to break the law, but certainly you can take direct action to rescue these girls, as happened in the case in Hounslow here in the UK. So, do feel free to go and rescue these girls. Clock's counting down. Wabosa, thank you, Wabosa, for your comment. Most Indians lack access to real news, and this whole comment is basically saying, what on earth is wrong with the masses of India? They are stupid. Why can't they see that they are being shown a fake narrative by their corrupt religious-led governments, irrespective of political parties? In other words, it doesn't matter if it's Congress, it doesn't matter if it's the BJP or any other political party. Every political party is corrupt, which is not a problem, because they're basically representing the majority of Indians. The grounded reality is horrific and it's shocking. I totally agree with you on this, Wabosa. All politicians in whichever nation, sadly, appear to be corrupt to some degree. They're always in it for themselves. There are very, very few politicians globally who are in it for a genuinely motivated by a feeling to help others, to actually genuinely help the people that they represent. Usually they're in it for their own career. More so these days, more so for some reason, it seems to have evolved, certainly here in the UK. Our politicians, never more than today, are in it for themselves, not to actually represent the people that elected them. They're in it for a career, to build their own careers, to go off then and bounce into industry to make their millions. Tony Blair, a prime example of that. It's shocking, and it's sad, a sad fact of life. Amrit Singh says, the problem is the labelling of all people from a geographical area. It's, again, all about collecting data. We need to identify those who are guilty of these crimes. We need to identify. And this follows a comment that came before where somebody actually criticised me for saying that this young girl, I said she's a young British girl. She was also Sikh. I said she's a British girl. And the criticism came saying that she was a Sikh. She wasn't British. And I said, no, she is Sikh and she is British. You know, they're not mutually exclusive. A girl, a Sikh, can be both Sikh and British. And you rightly say, Amrit Singh, similarly, a Sikh, British, Punjabi is a threefold identity. You can be Punjabi, you can be a Sikh, but you can also be British. In other words, you can be all three. It's like saying a Scotsman is a Scotsman, but can also be British. It's exactly the same. So in other words, absolutely, you can identify. You can be a Sikh, but you can also be a loyal Sikh, but a loyal British person, a loyal Punjabi, etc. So thank you for that, highlighting that situation. Gaming Edits, I just threw this one just as one of many examples. Good morning, sir. Thank you. Loads of names I don't recognise in the comments, and this is just one of hundreds that came in, of this love that came from you guys. Good morning to you, and a good day to all of you. Thank you for all of your comments, and all those who did make these comments of support and love and just loveliness, just general loveliness. Thank you for spreading that love. I spend every day spreading news that's horrible news, highlighting these horrible issues that we have to fight on a daily basis. So when we get this sort of this flow, this wave of love, it does remind me we need to be sending love out to all of us. Spread the love. Love is the biggest driver of goodness in humanity. So thank you for your comments. I'm throwing that wave of love back to you guys in a wonderful way. It fills me with a warm sense of fuzziness and happiness and love that I send back to you guys. So good morning to you, Gaming Edits, and a whole feeling of love to all my wonderful audience. Even to those who criticise, a big sense of love to you guys as well. This is the comment that really made me laugh. I did refer to, I think was it Friday or Thursday, your smoke alarm battery, Angus. Yes, the reason behind that, for those of you who noticed, there was that little chirp in the background. My smoke alarm, I record this show, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. And I come in here and record the show. My smoke alarm is 15 feet up in the studio. It's a huge undertaking to change the battery. So I came in here and I thought, oh God, what can I do? I don't have time to climb a massive ladder, a scary ladder. I did it, I posted the show. So yeah, I had to do that show with that going on in the background, and I thought nobody will notice. But clearly you guys did. And in fact, it made me laugh when SG said, I thought it was mine. I went to go and check the batteries. And I did actually listen back to the show and I heard it going in the background. And it sounds like it's wherever you're watching watching from, it sounds like it's in your own room. So apologies to all those who were running around their houses trying to find the smoke alarm whose battery had actually died. So it did make me chuckle, that. A final set, Noah Crazy Magic. Best Angus Scott, you're the best team anchor of Satellite TV. Well, I'm the only English-speaking anchor of Satellite TV, so therefore I am by definition the best and also the worst. But anyway, thank you for that lovely comment. Much appreciated. Sufton Muffins and Jay Camry, likewise, similar comments. Please share Punjabis, particularly spread the word around Punjab. We need more people in Punjab to watch the show. We've got to get the truth out there. We need more people in the Punjab, particularly around India. They need to know the truth. They need to know the fake narrative that's being spoon-fed them. We talk about that earlier comment referred to stupid Indians. That's not just India. That's actually most populations, sadly, are stupid. They believe, not in, I suppose, stupid in the literal sense, in that they believe everything they're told, and then that forms their opinions. It's just human nature. But we need to get the truth. People can only form the correct opinion, the truthful opinion, if they hear the truth, not the nonsense that comes from the Gurney media. So please like, share, comment, all that sort of YouTube-y stuff. But ultimately, it's up to you guys out there. Talk to your colleagues in the community. Have you watched Satellite TV? Subscribe, watch Satellite TV. But particularly if you're in the Punjab, get more people. There are ways, VPNs, change your settings to different countries. There are ways to reach us. We are banned, of course, in India, but please get people to bypass the ban and watch this show, because we need to get that word out. And let these people know, particularly the Khalistan supporters in Punjab, of which there are millions, we know there are millions, they need to know they are not alone. The Gurney media will make them believe that they are alone, that they are isolated. No, you're not. There are huge amounts, millions of Khalistan supporters hiding in Punjab. They're too afraid to speak up. But if you guys know that actually there are millions of you there, it will give you that, again, that warm sense of confidence. Don't worry, it's coming. And you're right to keep supporting it. And as SSK Trucking says, the efforts are paying off. The Khalistan movement is achieving higher goals day by day. And that's followed by Minder Singh. Thanks for showing the true colours of India to the West. Absolutely. Sikhs will never... This is a really powerful comment. Thank you for this. Sikhs will always remember who stand with the truth. I think you must have some memories about being a Sikh in a past life that is making you speak about the Sikh cause. God works in mysterious ways. And this really resonated with me. And I've said this before on previous shows in the past. When I met the owner of Satellite TV, the gentleman behind Satellite TV, he actually said to me, it was a very moving moment. He actually said, I believe you were brought to me by Waheguru, that I was actually sent by God. Now, I'm not saying that as to say I'm a messenger of God. I'm not. Absolutely. I'm just a presenter. You know, I love doing what I do. But I was brought clearly together with Satellite TV because I'm so passionate about the Khalistan cause. I believe in it deeply. I'm so passionate about the Sikh cause because I align so deeply. I'm not a Sikh, obviously, but I align with the values so deeply that this comment aligns with the owner of Satellite TV's comments that actually... There's mysterious forces at play that brought me here to this seat, to talking to you guys. And even the mention here that maybe in a past life I was a Sikh. Who knows? Maybe I was, because I do feel so passionately about the whole history and the culture of it. Who knows? Stranger things have happened, but a fascinating subject to talk about and think about. And then you say, to finish off the show, gosh, we're so over time. It's been a long show today. Apologies. But yes, as you say, the Khalistan train is about to get on. It is about to leave the station. In other words, get on board with the Khalistan movement. The Khalistan train is leaving the station. If you're not on it, you're going to miss it. Khalistan Zindabad. Absolutely. What a fabulous comment to finish the show on. So jump on the Khalistan train. Be on it. It's coming, it's leaving the station, and it's building up speed. It is building up steam to full speed ahead. So on that note, thanks so much for everybody. Do keep your comments coming in. Thank you for all your lovely comments, but do keep more comments coming in. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions, your perspectives on things that I talk about and things that you'd like me to talk about. Message me directly, as many of you have done. Thank you so much for all your emails. message@sutledgetv.com. Send me links of things that you think I should look at, research, whatever. Much appreciated. But that's it for another day. Must rush to the end now. We've run out of time. Hopefully, God willing, I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day. You've been watching Perspectives. I will see you next time.